Well, good evening, friends. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Mystery Wine Blind Tasting. I'm Neal, Wavra, your host, here at Field & Main on what is a blustery October evening. It was downright chilly, very cold. My understanding is that most everything, if not everything, has been harvested in the way of the Virginia wine industry and the Virginia wine scene. Although I think a little Chamberson came in today, and some made its way to us thanks to our friend and winemaker Jeremy down at Barrel Oak. Some Chamberson grapes were dropped off so that we might put them in a new preparation we're working on. So stay tuned for that. If you're joining us to play this mystery wine game, this little red number, please let me know. Say hey, and we'll start this program by looking and observing this wine, smelling it, and of course, tasting it, which I'm going to hold off from doing just for a moment so I don't have that bias as I go into the first two. Bobbin and Dean, good evening to you. Welcome. So excited you're here. Thank you for joining. It's quite nice. It's quite nice. Hello, Kubitskis. Welcome. Glad to have you with us too. I'm sorry, I'm just getting ahead of myself. The nose has been quite intriguing. I mean, it just poured it. I poured it at 6:59 and then pressed go live for this broadcast. And it's spectacular, the nose. Karen Chapman and Rebecca are here tonight. Thank you for joining. It's wonderful. Well, let's kick this off as Candy, Kevin, and Derek and Kathy also join. Thanks, guys. Great to see you. Dean, you said a little bit of an off nose. Blowing off, that's good. I hope you don't have a bad bottle. If you do, we certainly can replace that bottle. But yeah, I'm not getting that aroma on mine. It's mostly about fruit. There's a little graphite note, but we'll get to that in just a second. Curtis, Renee, Bill, Debbie, hello from Fredericksburg. So we've got Fredericksburg, we've got Pennsylvania. Natalie, yes, ruby color. Thank you for pulling us back on target. Where do we see in here? Let's look at the visual. In addition to that ruby color, what do you see? Is it deep and dark and intense in color? Can you see through it, the opacity of it? Is it lighter and more rich color, deeper, darker would indicate perhaps a thicker skin varietal, a lighter color, more see-through, a lighter skin varietal. No real age. So looking for age by way of Curtis's note. At the rim here, as you're looking down on the wine and moving to the center, is there a gradation of color? Does it go from sort of a brownish hue to something more kind of pure colored there? Is it one continuum of color? In the case like this one, it doesn't really have a big variation. That's more of an indication of youth. There's a little bit of a watery rim. A little watery rim indicates perhaps a maybe riper climate, a touch more alcohol in the wine, something to consider. So that might give you a hint about that. This medium kind of profile here with the ruby color is one of those things in the blind tasting world where it doesn't give you a clear direction yet, right? It's not like if this was super inky black, you could start to say, I think we can cut out Gamay or Pinot Noir. But there's enough variation from this color to not be able to say with any real great specificity what it is just yet. And that's okay. That's not something to be worried about. As we smell and taste, we'll get a greater sense and begin to chip away or deduce what this wine is as opposed to just knowing what it is right off the bat. Julie's given us one that's not going to be necessarily a layup, right? And whenever is it? Even going back a couple of times to a Pinot Noir that was from Patagonia. That wasn't a layup by any means, but Pinot Noir should be something easier to catch. Gorgeous color, Sarah's noting, and it smells great. I agree. So a medium dark thing, as we talked about here, medium dark, so you can't quite read through it, but you can make out something underneath it, right? It's not so opaque and dark that you can't. So from that standpoint, give it a little swirl. and look for the rim that's created at the top of the swirl, and then what forms by way of tears, these little droplets that form and then come down as they drop. What are we looking at? Ones that form slowly and move slowly, ones that form quickly and shoot down as they do, and they make their way all the way to the bottom. Those are the legs. And then do those legs stay there for a period of time? Are they hanging out? The more viscosity in a wine is generally an indication of more alcohol in a wine. And so that could be an indication where you have a bit more of a riper profile. And so these are pretty fast. They form and they run. So not the biggest wine, right? It's you're not also like, sometimes you'll get a sheet where the wine just sort of comes right back down. It's usually a little bit lighter in profile. These have solid legs that form and they hold. They move relatively quick. So we're kind of in the middle on a lot, right? Ruby color gives you middle. The color, the intensity of this color, the appearance is kind of in the middle. The alcohol may be in a little bit of the middle. There's a tiny bit of a watery rim. So, if we're blocking a wine from the lowest alcohol wine being, say, an off-dry Riesling that has 8% or so of alcohol, to a dry wine that's probably in the 11.5 to 12.5%, kind of being light, and then 12.5 to 13.5, 14 being medium, and then 14 plus being rich and powerful. So, or 13.5 plus. We're probably in the moderate range, but high moderate. So 13.5, 14, something in that range. This is a guess, right? This is an educated idea based just on the appearance. And so it also helps us understand that if we said this is the coolest climate kind of production with low alcohol, not necessarily. If we said, hey, I think this is Beaujolais Nouveau, right? Really, really fresh, bright, fun, just based on the appearance, we couldn't probably make that argument. So let's smell it. And Sarah's dragging us to that point beautifully with a little bit of mint and raspberry. Those are great descriptors for this particular wine. Mint's always a little bit challenging because it smells like mint tea, doesn't it? There's a dried mint quality about this. Mint, it's like one of those things where eucalyptus in particular oftentimes presents in, say, Australia, sometimes in South Africa, sometimes in California. This isn't quite eucalyptus, and so it's just more of a minty note. Dean's picking up a little bit on the alcohol on the nose, which I think is a fair point for sure. Really a lot of the aroma that you're getting in a wine is the alcoholic esters being released as we're swirling it. And so they're carrying the aromas with them. A lot of times, if there's more alcohol, you pick up a little bit of that kind of a sensation of burn in your nose, in your nasal cavity. That there's it's not an uncomfortable burn by any means, although I suppose it could be. But you're not usually like sniffing hard a bourbon or a rye whiskey or something of that sort. With wine, you are, and you're picking up aromas. And sometimes the alcohol can kind of just really sort of separate from the experience of the associated flavors in the aroma. So fig and raisin coming in, medicinal in that quality too. So there's a ripe, medicinal is like an interesting mix of that herbal and ripe, because medicine, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. So medicine involves something we perceive as sweet, but while it is also usually herbal. And so herbal in the world of wine is generally a little bit underripe, and sweet something riper. And so having the two makes for an interesting combination. Might be a blend, right? Because you're getting dimension from that potentially. Might just be a multi-situational pick. Different points in the harvest, and it gives dimension to the wine. Different sites within a particular vineyard or vineyards where one is cooler and one is a little bit riper, and they blend the two to create that dimension. So licorice coming through too, leather and tobacco. There's a lot going on for sure. We've talked about this before, but I'm getting tractor beamed on that mint tea. I'm now like tunnel palate, tunnel assessment, where I'm only smelling that. I mean, I'm picking up what else you're throwing down too in the way of the leather and tobacco and the licorice, but I keep coming back to that mint tea. Yeah, it's an intriguing nose. And the only place I go immediately with like mintiness is sort of Australia and maybe Shiraz. And I'm not sure necessarily by the color that that's that. And sometimes you'd pick up more of sort of a cherry and a cola kind of thing and chocolate cherry. There's an earthiness now coming out too. So we're looking for a few things, right? Fruit, earth, and wood. We're always looking for those three general categories of aroma and also the palate when we taste it later. And you've already thrown out quite a bit, kind of running from that theme. The leather and tobacco would be more of that earth side of things. Curtis is noting a little cedar touch of incense. That's the wood presentation of the wine. So there's probably a little bit of wood here, maybe. It's at least indicating that on the palate. And then the fruit side, we've got, some lovely fruit notes, reddish fruit, right? And then there's that raspberry quality that Sarah noted, and then the sort of fig raisin. So there's fruit coming in medicinally, coming in red fruit, coming in raisinated or dried. And so there's a range of fruit. No green notes. I'm not picking up any of that note, Dean, as you're asking there. The word for it would be pyrazine. Some of that stewed bell pepper, green bean, canned green bean, bell pepper itself. And when you're looking at vegetal in that regard, the pyrazine quality, that pyrazine note is often associated with the Cabernet family. So from Sauvignon Blanc to Cabernet Franc to Cabernet Sauvignon to Carmenere, Malbec, kind of the Bordeaux varietals. You don't get pyrazine in something like Nebbiolo or Syrah, for example. And so if you were saying, I smell a nose full of stewed bell peppers, like this is an Italian Italian sausage sandwich in a glass, and then you called it Nebbiolo or you called it Shiraz, you'd be less on target because one wouldn't be found in the other. So noting that we don't have a pyrazine or a vegetal note is important, and it helps to kind of cut out. So as this might fit the profile of a Bordeaux red, it won't necessarily be that, because we don't also pick up a little hint of that. Although there are quite a few examples of Bordeaux reds that don't have a pyrazine presentation. But if you had one for sure, then you could begin to think about what that might be. Yeah, Turley Senso, cool. Senso is really cool grape, isn't it? So, from that standpoint, a Rhone red or a Rhone varietal, but done here in California, is an interesting idea as something we can consider. So as we're starting to build our portfolio of what this might be and creating the profile for this particular wine, it's got a spectrum of fruit, a medium body, potentially a little bit of alcohol, ruby color, youthful. It has earthen notes and wood notes on the nose. So let's taste this and see where it takes us. Can we confirm all the things that we've smelled and what we've also seen in the wine, or not? It's interesting. So with your first taste, if something jumps out, pay attention to it. But if it isn't immediately apparent or something isn't jumping out at you, start to work the tastes first. Not so much the flavors, but where are the tannins at? What's the body like? Is it skim, 2% or whole milk? Where is the alcohol at? Is it warm? Is it hot? So is it higher alcohol, lower alcohol? And where's the acidity at? Is it making you salivate for 15, 20 plus seconds? Is it just sort of a 10 to 15 second-ish kind of situation, or is it short, really kind of round? Where does this wine fit? Medium plus for you, Dean. 2%. Yep. The acid's pretty high. Big tannins, Candy. Yeah. In the back. They're really not as forward, are they? And they stay. They do linger a little bit. They dry. They have a drying sensation on the palate. Yeah. This isn't a full-bodied wine, right? It's not the most robust wine, but it is certainly not a light wine. And so it's medium body. You could argue a little bit that it might be maybe medium plus. The acidity, though, I would say is more along the lines of medium plus. I'm still, even as I'm talking, right, I'm salivating underneath my tongue. Some notes about the aroma. So let's go back to the taste, or taste it again with respect to the aromas that we picked up on the fruit side, the earth side, and the wood side. Dean was thinking that some of the notes didn't match, and Natalie and team think that there are some that do. Which ones do and which ones don't? There's a quality of like that red fruit up front, and then the front in a weird way, because the tannin at the back end and the acid at the back end are so prominent, or more prominent, I should say, not so prominent, but they're more prominent. The front part of the experience seems very short. And I'm not sure I've ever said that about a wine. Like the beginning is always short relative to, a middle and an end too. I mean, it's not going to take over the experience, but what you experience in the first part of the experience is short, and there's a tiny bit of fruit there. And then it builds into that sort of tobacco, earth, wood, cedar, wood tannin kind of quality about this, where there is still fruit there in that experience, but it is intertwined with a whole host of other things. So, I'm not picking up as much of that sort of figgy raisin quality. Are you? I'm definitely picking up alcohol. There's alcohol in the finish. Part of that tannin experience is made like amplified, and I think the acidity is amplified too by a little bit of lingering residual heat coming from the alcohol in the wine. This is it's almost a little bitter note too on the back end, and that might be that alcohol. Natalie, by noting the very fruity part, what fruit's coming out for you? What are you experiencing on the palate that accords with what we said about the nose, or differs and is an addition to on the palate? Yeah, there's a quality about the palate experience and the back end in particular that is where a lot of the experience of the wine is found. And it does seem to belie the idea of the richness that we might have expected from the aroma, per Dean's note there. Berries and red berries and tart cherry, and kind of less expressive, less ripe, less pungent fruit experience or qualities are on the palate, some of which we didn't get necessarily as prominently on the nose, and in fact seemed kind of to run counter to some of what we found in the nose. There's almost like a little cobbler-esque kind of quality, not quite, but like tart berries in a cobbler where the berry themselves are tart and the sweetness is coming from the sugar added to the cobbler, not that the natural sweetness of the ripeness of the berry is actually contributing. So there's a back and forth there, a sweet, sour kind of quality. I'm still contending, and I think I'll call it bitter. You're picking up on that too. With the alcohol, tannin, the acid on the back end, it's leaving it in an interesting way. So what could this be? What might it not be? And maybe we start there, right? So as we start to think about what this wine is, again, what we've said about it, what is it that it may not be because of what we said? And then what might it be because of what we said? So medium plus body, medium to medium plus acidity, tannin that's pronounced, but not super tannins. They're not huge, but they're there and they're lengthy at the end. They're kind of fine too. They're not big and chunky. They're not forward presenting. We're looking at a 2% sort of medium weight here texturally. It's got a ruby color. It has fruit notes that are a bit riper and more diverse perhaps on the nose than they are on the palate. Maybe that's partly because of the youth of this wine. It being younger, it's not quite as expressive in the palate. Having just opened it myself, 22 minutes ago, it isn't maybe necessarily as open and integrated with the fruit on the palate. So maybe it needs a little bit more time. For those that have it open earlier, perhaps you have a thought about, is this expressing more fruited on the palate because of an extra half an hour or what have you? We thought about it not necessarily being a Bordeaux blend. I threw out, say, Syrah relative to, or Shiraz relative to the mint that was there presently. I'm not picking up that mint on the palate. There is a sort of tea note still, but not a mint tea now. It's like Earl Grey. Yeah, it's got a tension about it. It's kind of a cool tension in the wine that says, like, I've got more to say, but I'm not saying it now. You're gonna need to let me work at this for a while, or you're gonna afford me some time. With a wine like this, with that tannin element, I like to put it with things that have a little bit of fat, a little bit of potentially uncooked or rare protein, so that ending fat can latch or that ending tannin can latch onto that fat or protein, and they become a bond, and that softens out or kind of like smooths out the experience of the wine. I have to say that the experience, while it's a little bit brash at the back end, it is compelling because it has so much to say on the nose, and there's more going on in the palate. You just have to work harder to find it. Rhone varietal, Sarah is saying. Yes, so let's put Rhone on the board, right? We talked about how it probably isn't Bordeaux necessarily because of the lack of pyrazine. It's not a definitive answer there, but it is a good way to go. Also, I think we might see a little bit more color, right? We might see that more purple hue, not the necessarily straight red hue. And so a Rhone varietal is appropriate. What about, just working France? I like to think about France first. I'm drawn that way from a varietal standpoint, and then it also takes me around France in a regional way. Cabernet Franc is sort of out in the Loire Valley because we've talked about that pyrazine note, that herbal note, not necessarily there. You venture over to Burgundy and Pinot Noir, not necessarily there. The Rhone, Sanso was talked about early on by way of a comparative note, comparative tasting that's happening at Kavitsky's. That's in the running. Bordeaux, maybe not. And so you have that general profile, and then you can jump to other spots, say in Europe, where do you have Italian expression here? Do you have Spanish expression here? We definitely had a little bit of that wood note. I'm still getting some of that too. That draws me always to Spain a little bit. Tannat. Candy, you're noting some Tannat. That's kind of cool. Yeah, there's a tannin quality about Tannat for sure. If this is Tannat, it would be a tiny bit, maybe a tiny to moderate bit light for some Tannat, but that tannin that's persistent at the back end, that's when you're thinking about what is tannic, saying tannat is an appropriate answer. So, and no worries about the struggle to land this. I'm having that same struggle. I was just thinking 1 minute ago, I hope somebody comes up with a good idea because I don't have one yet. At 25 minutes, it hasn't changed. You're normally in this, we see it around 22 minutes, something kind of shifting in the wine, kind of kicking into a new gear. And I'm sort of experiencing the same thing. There's a little bit of meatiness. So Rhone varietal, we talked about Senso, Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah. Other varietals for sure possible. Do we think this is old world or new world? And I know we've talked about how that's difficult to determine today and how less and less that's a factor in professional blind tasting. But when I say that, do we think the high acid, the earthen notes, the secondary earthen quality about this wine, the wood note, is indicative more of wines we'd find in Europe or wines we'd find in, say, the US, South America, South Africa, Australia? Primitivo, so Italian potential. Dean, Mencia or Bobal. Actually, yes, that's great. So here come the good ideas. Primitivo, so Zinfandel, Primitivo coming from the southern part of Italy, maybe Campania or other provinces down that way. Primitivo could give you this red fruit, could give you a little bit of this earthen note, probably could give you a little bit of that tannin. And it gives you a ripe kind of expression coming from further south in Italy where you get some of that maybe fig and that dried fruit raisin, but also could give you some red fruit too, depending on where it's being grown. Spain, does Mencia fit? Mencia absolutely could fit, right? It's going to be a lighter bodied but tannic expression. It's kind of in this realm. So that's a nice thought. And Bobal, yep. Bobal, wow, good call there. Maybe a little darker, but that's, I mean, I've had very few Bobal, right? Super cool if we had a Bobal to taste. That's awesome. Yep. And when we're talking about Rhone, to Sarah's point, excuse me, Rhone, oftentimes, more often than not, beyond more often than not, super often than not even considered as a single varietal. It is always a blend, and there are very rare occasions where it's not. But this is, if we're talking Rhone, we're talking probable blend, right? And we had dimension on the nose, we had dimension in the expression, and so that could be coming from a variety of varietals in a blend. But so Mencia, Primitivo, Nero d'Avola, coming from the southern part, another varietal, Aglianico from Italy. What about, like, say, there's wood on this. What about Tempranillo? Does it fit that? Does it have that medium weight, some wood, the tannin? Could it be Tempranillo? This tannin is kind of particular, and I'm puzzling there. I'm not sure. On the Rhone side of things, I'm not like fully comfortable. I mean, the Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, maybe there's a little bit of like a whole cluster element to this to keep it a little lighter and to bring in some of that astringent tannin that's sort of on the back end. Tempranillo is grown elsewhere, Dean, but not like it's grown elsewhere because they are trying to try it and make it work, but it's not known elsewhere necessarily, other than, of course, in Portugal too, where it goes by different names. Yeah, Sarah, to your point, like Arizona does make great Tempranillo. It's not like the signature grape of a place, but they are experimenting because it's a hot, dry climate that's gets all of its rain at one point and has cooling nights because of high elevation there. Tempranillo. Does this, Texas too? Yes. Very good point. Thank you, Julie. Does this taste like Italian wine? Does it taste like Spanish wine? Does it taste like French wine? What is there an inclination you have going toward that? There's some Tempranillo in, say, Washington State, I think, too. There's Tempranillo in California, of course. Dean, you're lost. That's okay. I think I am too. I mean, I'm going to have to be stabbing in the dark. So let's work our process, right? When you get lost, you go back to the process and you get close as you can. So, multiple Chano. Thank you for that. So Italians tasting, you're answering my question about what does it taste like by saying a varietal, which indicates the place. So multiple Chano from, say, Abruzzo. Cleo, welcome aboard. Thank you for your guesses. Primitivo to something else. Yeah, I think there's a good call in that. So it's interesting. Like, it has European sensibilities about it, but they don't fit comfortably. And so bringing it to the New World with a varietal like Tempranillo, for example, and I'm not saying it's Tempranillo, but the Tempranillo Arizona example where, all right, it has a home somewhere else and it doesn't quite evoke what that home would say about that varietal. So maybe it's that varietal somewhere else, somewhere where we're less familiar with it, somewhere where we're not necessarily associating that varietal with that place, certainly by law, right? By an appellation standard. And so that's an interesting idea. I can certainly get behind that too. So for Dean, you're kind of in the US with an interesting red varietal. The Candy Julie, are you thinking the same thing? That's what your note there saying. Portugal. I think there's an opportunity there. Yeah. I mean, for varietals that, that are difficult to pronounce and I'm not super familiar with necessarily, right? You've got Touriga Nacional and Tinta Roriz and Tinta Franca. You have other varietals that are Arinto and Baga. Baga is an interesting varietal from Portugal that has higher tannin, but I think it'd be a little bit richer. Argentina, Uruguay, Alicante Boucher. Cool, right? So that's kind of fun. Like Californian, Central Valley, Alicante Boucher. That's a neat idea. I think that, that makes some sense in this context. Maybe a little darker than this reddish kind of color, but the tannin keeps hanging around. So there's tannin there. It's a very tough one. All right, where are we going, guys? Gals? Where do you want to stay? Where do you want to plant a flag? This is a tough one. I don't have a good answer for you, other than the fact that I'm starting to have a little fuzzy teeth with the tannins building. So it is a tannic red. For that reason, you can wipe out sort of Pinot Noir, Gamay. I don't think this is a Bordeaux creation. So Rhone varietals, Spanish varietals, Portuguese varietals. There comes that minty note again. Wow. This one has me totally stumped. But rules are rules, and you have to pick something. And we are at that point where we must. So California Obscure Rhone Varietal. That is as specific a vague answer as we've ever given, but a good one. I think that kind of tries to describe what this is. All right, where am I going to go? I have to pick something. And you're double second guessing yourself, Sarah, too, jumping around. California Mencia or not. Everybody has a hedge here in this one, right? Don't worry, there's no judgment. We're not, if anybody jumps out last minute here and gets it right, that'll be pretty impressive. But tannic red. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna stick with, say, Tempranillo. Does that mean Tempranillo from Spain? I think I like you guys thinking about it elsewhere. Gosh, yeah. Man. Cleo, no worries, judging yourselves. This is a tough one. You're watching me struggle with it. I don't get to see you struggling with it, but I know you perhaps are by your descriptions, and it's okay. We're going to learn something when we unveil this. So let's do that. I'm going to say Tempranillo with hesitation. And like not Rioja Tempranillo. So Tempranillo from the Toro in Spain. Young, 2021, 2022, so 2 to 4 years of age. Yeah, that's where I'm going. Ready, guys? Oh, dang. I should have followed you guys fully. Central Coast, California, and Tempranillo. Well, shit. Pardon my language. Okay. It's called the Fabulist. This is Tempranillo from the West Coast. I mean, I think we did pretty good. We kind of nailed it in talking about it, but I mean, like California Obscure Rhone Varietal, it's Tempranillo, so it's not Rhone, but California, you nailed that. Could easily see Northern Spain or elsewhere. I mean, so Spain meets this. I mean, like, we did okay. If I had settled into just wanting to follow you guys fully and not worry about riding your coattails, I would have said California Tempranillo. I'm trying to get credit now after I've revealed what this is, and I've already put my guess in, so no credit given. But hey, interesting wine, huh? 2023, super new, so it's just out. So I think it needs a bit of time. I think, Dean, points got to be given, at least fractional points for the or not an obscure varietal situation here. Because Tempranillo from the Central Coast is not a known entity, right? So we're tasting something different. I got to say, I think we did a great job of trying to get at what this was, and knowing most of you, all the comments at the end sort of led toward the idea that this is semi-recognizable, but not from a place that is known from. And so that's really, really cool. You guys got me there, certainly. You carried me. You did the yeoman's work on carrying that. So the Fabulist, Tempranillo. Wow. Cool. Huh. I like that little statement on the back end. I'm sorry, I was reading. Many misfortunes may befall those of intrepid spirit, but the Fabulist trusts that those who dare face danger with a friend can share the delicious prize in the end. And we have done that this evening. Thank you so much for playing along. If you'd like to get a little more tasting in this week, we have some spaces still available for our semi-annual, biannual wine buying event. Our fall wine buying event is this Saturday. We have 16 wines picked out for you to try, ranging from all over the world. A very cool little setup of kind of Ramato or a skin contacted Pinot Gris from Italy with one from Oregon too. That's going to be a fun part of the tasting, I think, for sure. Maybe a little bit outside of the box, along with some fun, easygoing reds and a neat Pinot Noir from California, from Farniente, that we got a great deal on in order to bring it in at more volume and can pass it along to you. So some fun things to taste. Tickets are available for that via our website and our reservation offering on Talk. So anyway, that's coming up if you want to do some more tasting. And then otherwise, I will see you back here next month as we do it again. This is a fun one. This was a full-on puzzle, and it made us all squirm and struggle. And I think we should pat ourselves a little bit on the back and take a little bit of pride in the fact that we got close. Like, we were circling around an unknown, right? A known unknown. Like, this was not something that would be just a grab and understanding. So this was a good workout for us. We struggled, and I think as a result of that, gained new muscle memory, new taste palate memory from the experience. Cheers, everybody. Thank you for the wonderful tasting this evening.